Federal Parliament rises tonight for 6 weeks until Budget Day. And as MPs prepare to leave this place, Tony Abbott's trench warfare over a carbon tax is still the dominant issue. Yesterday, the opposition leader addressed the anti-carbon tax rally outside Parliament. The protest was peaceful but not pleasant.
As I look out on this crowd of fine Australians, I want to say that I do not see scientific heretics. I do not see environmental vandals. I see people who want honest government.
Julia Gillard, you lied.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was delighted to hear the Prime Minister say the other day that she had learnt a lot from scripture lessons. Thou shalt not bear false witness.
Some of the banners at that rally yesterday were nothing short of offensive. One read, "Ditch the witch," another, "Ditch the bitch," and "Julia is Bob Brown's bitch." Last night, Tony Abbott issued a statement saying, "I don't endorse the use of abusive or hurtful language of any kind and regret its use by a small number of attendees at the protest." Climate Change Minister Greg Combet questioned the climate change credentials and agenda of many of those attending the rally. He said it was unbefitting for the leader of a major political party to be a part of it. He joins us in our Parliament House studio. Minister, good morning.
How are you, friend?
Was the Prime Minister offended by the slogans and the signs at the rally yesterday?
Oh, she's pretty tough. I actually haven't spoken to her directly about the issue, but I think any fair-minded person looking at it would find it particularly unpleasant. And some of those placards and some of the slogans we've just heard are extremely offensive. In fact, they're despicable, and they have no place for a leader of a major political party being associated with them. And I think I noted Tony Abbott's efforts late last night to provide some distance between himself and some of the things that were said and some of the placards that were there, but I really think he needs to do that in a decisive way. Because
what would that mean? What do you mean?
I think he needs to apologise for being associated with it and completely dissociate himself from it. He is the alternative Prime Minister of this country, and I don't think it's appropriate that someone in that position, with the responsibility that they hold, should be associated with that sort of conduct and those sort of slogans and some of the organisations.
Of course, not everyone at the rally was behaving with that, in that kind of way. Some of the people there yesterday don't like the idea of a carbon tax. It doesn't mean they don't believe in climate change. Do you distinguish between those who are simply climate sceptics, and there were some of those there, and those who don't want to pay another tax and don't trust the Prime Minister because she broke a promise?
Well, of course I do. I mean, for a start, I've always stood up for the democratic rights and values of our society. I've been involved in many rallies myself when I was a trade union leader, and I know that many people of good conscience attend rallies, and there would have been many there yesterday. However, I'm also conscious from my own experience that you have to be pretty careful at rallies about associating yourself with some groups, for example, like the League of Rights, with an anti-Semitic kind of background, or some of the other groups that were there.
Yesterday?
Apparently so, and also be very conscious of associating yourself with the sorts of placards that Mr Abbott was photographed with. Now, if he doesn't think those placards were appropriate, then I think he should dissociate himself from them and do it so in a very clear and decisive fashion, because it was unpleasant. A lot of the things that were said there, I think, are unacceptable.
What's going on here, though? I mean, this morning in one newspaper, the PM wrote an op-ed saying extremists from either side shouldn't be allowed to hijack the climate change debate, the carbon price debate. Would you describe these people as extremists, and what is it about this debate that is galvanising on this side of the spectrum a group of people that are behaving like this?
Well, I think you've got to go to the fact that Tony Abbott called for a people's revolt. That's an unusual thing in Australian
Sure, but he
politics.
didn't call for the League of Rights, some of the extreme right. He didn't say, let's have a people's revolt from the extreme right.
It's not a great surprise, though, that it would motivate some of the more extreme fringe groups in the political spectrum in Australia to be involved in such a thing. I mean, certainly in my experience, I would have anticipated that might likely occur at a rally like that yesterday. And it is a democratic society. People are entitled to have their view and argue their case and peacefully protest and express their opinion. That is welcomed. However, what we're dealing with here is the character of the leader of the opposition. He chose to associate himself with that rally, with some of the organisations, therefore, that are there, with the views that are expressed, and with the placards that were held up and that have been seen by everyone on television. I don't think it's appropriate for the leader of a major political party to be associated with those sorts of placards and some of the messages there. And the simple thing to do is for Tony Abbott to clearly indicate that he doesn't agree with those positions and dissociate himself from them.
I want to come to the policy in a minute, but some of those same fringe groups, I think it's fair to say, were galvanised by the gun debate when John Howard was Prime Minister, and he addressed rallies where effigies of him were burnt. He was called Jackboot Johnny. Is this comparative, or do you think we're seeing more intense insults being made here because of the gender of our Prime Minister? Do you see a difference?
Well, I have my own views about that, and I'm sure that many in the community would have views about that, and I think that's some of the unpleasantness behind it. And look, the Prime Minister's a tough person, and she's certainly not going to be complaining about anything. However, there is a question about the character and values of a person who is the leader of the opposition, the alternative Prime Minister, associating himself in this way with this sort of sloganeering, these sorts of placards, these types of messages, and he can resolve it very quickly and easily by dissociating himself from it, because I think it is unbefitting a leader of the opposition, the alternative Prime Minister of this country, to be associated with such things.
Okay, let's get to your climate change policies. A report by the Grattan Institute released overnight is deeply critical of $12 billion worth of government spending over 15 years on 300 programs to reduce carbon emissions and increase renewable energy. Now, 15 years, it obviously has implications for both major political parties, but it's not a great sort of, ring of confidence for voters to look at that kind of assessment of the policy efforts so far by government, including yours.
What it is a clear and unequivocal statement that a market mechanism to introduce a carbon price is the best public policy response if we wish to reduce our pollution and tackle climate change. That's the simple message. Now, since I became Minister, we've wound back and capped a number of programs of this nature, and Senator Wong before me did the same. What we have been endeavouring to argue for is that we've got to adopt the most efficient, lowest cost way of tackling climate change, and that's through a carbon price in our economy via a market mechanism like a carbon tax or an emissions trading scheme. That's why we're arguing that case. Direct subsidy schemes, such as the opposition leader is advocating now, are proven to not have worked. They're not effective environmentally, and they're extremely high cost, and that's the key message from this report.
Okay, you've asked the Productivity Commission to take a look at what other countries are doing with pricing carbon. This is a key element of your work towards the policy and your sales pitch for the policy. The chairman of the Productivity Commission, Gary Banks, has now said it's like trying to compare apples and oranges. They can't do it.
Well, I'm unsurprised by it, and again,
Why?
Because it is not easy to compare apples and oranges. But however, whatever we can produce that provides us an empirical basis to compare the measures that are going on in economies with which we have strong trading relationships is an important addition to our understanding in this debate. We'll wait for the final report, and it will be an important report for us all to consider when the Productivity Commission produces it. But in order to inform the debate, it will be important, and in order to inform the decision-making insofar as it can, it will also be important. But again, it is why the government has adopted the policy proposal for a carbon pricing mechanism that we have put forward, and in particular, why it is good public policy to start with a fixed price on carbon while all of the information matures and while the steps that other countries are taking can be better and better understood.
But Gary Banks also said that our dependence on coal will mean that Australia will need to be a big buyer of carbon credits from international markets. Does that mean that Australia's actual emissions from our own smokestacks will not decline, that we'll simply meet our targets by buying credits offshore?
This is the point the government has been making for some time. This is the issue to do with our targeted reductions in emissions. We have a highly emissions-intensive economy. We have to devise a carbon price mechanism that is suitable for our own domestic circumstances.
But one that will get the emissions down.
Yes, of course it is. However, you have to be sensitive to our own economy. 80% of our electricity supply is coming from coal-fired electricity, for example. We don't have nuclear power in this country. We don't have larger reserves of, at this stage, until the investment comes on renewable energy sources. That's why the government's supporting renewable energy And it's why, with a carbon pricing mechanism and tackling climate change in our economy, you have to make a transition over time. We've had the benefit of access to cheap coal resources and relatively cheap by international standards electricity as a result. We've industrialised on that basis. We have to have a carbon price mechanism which is sensitive to our own economy, and that is precisely what the government has put forward. And it's precisely why our unconditional 5% reduction target by 2020 is an appropriate one.
And just finally, you're close to finalising the package of assistance for trade-exposed industries and taxpayers, well, a couple of months away perhaps. The Financial Review this morning reports the government's ruled out linking more major tax reform to the climate change debate, the kind of reform in the Henry Review. So we're going to get tax cuts but not tax reform, is that it?
Well, it hasn't been ruled out. It is a live option. We'll be considering all of the options for providing household assistance.
The kind of reforms in the Henry Review are a live option?
Well, all of the issues that may relate to tax reform as a measure of delivering assistance to households as we bring in a carbon price will be looked at, and there are live options, as the Prime Minister's indicated on previous occasions. And don't forget here what this is. What we are proposing is a price on carbon paid by the large emitters in our economy. There'll be less than 1,000 of them, and every dollar raised will be used to support households, support jobs in the most affected industries, and support initiatives in other climate change and clean energy areas. We'll be looking at all the options to deliver those goals.
Greg Combet, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Fran. Bye-bye.
Greg Combet, Climate Change Minister. It's 12 minutes to 8 on Radio National Breakfast. In just a moment, we'll be joined by Sophie Mirabella, the Shadow Industry Minister.